Hi and welcome back to my channel. So lately I have been binge watching Books and Lala's old videos, and I came across one video where she lists 10 authors, famous authors, that she hasn't read yet and feel a little bit ashamed of not having read yet. So I think it would be fun to do a similar video. So I'm going to list 10 authors that I haven't read yet and feel a little bit ashamed of. And these are authors that I plan on reading within the next year, hopefully sooner, but you never know what's going to happen, so I don't want to promise too much. I'm going to link the video by Books and Lala below if you want to check that out, and let's get into it. So the first author is actually inspired by Books and Lala. It is Stephen King, and I know that he is one of her favorite authors. And she's really inspired me to want to read Stephen King. I've never been a horror buff. I've never really liked horror movies, and I've never given horror books a real chance. I know that Stephen King writes in other genres as well, but when I think of Stephen King, I think of horror. And I haven't even seen that many of the movies that are based on his books. I haven't seen The Shining or Cujo. I think the only movie I've seen is the latest version of It. So, not being a horror buff, I never really gave horror books a chance, and it's something I want to change. I think that maybe I would like horror books more than horror movies, because you have to build up the frightening things in your head, and I think that it would be a more sort of impactful experience. So I've decided to give horror books a real try, and I have watched some booktube videos on Stephen King and where to start with all his books to choose between. There are so many choices, and I still haven't made my choice, but so I'm very open to suggestions. So if you have one, please put them in the comments. So the second author is J.R.R. Tolkien, and I have seen all the movies, but I haven't read any of the books. I haven't really read any proper fantasy books, except like Narnia and Harry Potter when I was a kid, and I really want to get more into fantasy, and I think that it could be something that I really enjoy. So I think that I will start by reading The Hobbit, because I know that I like the Tolkien universe. I have seen the Lord of the Rings movies many times because I really enjoy them. On the contrary, The Hobbit, I've only seen the movies once, like as they came out at the cinema, and I enjoyed those movies less. So I think that it would be fun to read the book and see if maybe I will enjoy that more and sort of get into the universe of that book a little bit more and sort of understand it better. So The Hobbit is high on my priority list, and I will get to reading that as soon as I can. So the third author is Joyce Carol Oates, and when I'm in the bookstore, I always see her books and I'm always drawn to her section. But then when I read the backs of the books, nothing really tickles my fancy. Nothing really intrigues me. But I do have a nagging feeling that I am missing out on something, so I really want to give her a try. I'm going to do some more research on which book to start with, but if anyone has any suggestions, please put them in the comments below. So the next few authors are going to be classic authors in every sense of the word, and they are from different countries. And first off, we are going to France. And as an immigrant in France, I do want to read the big famous French authors, and Gustave Lubach I haven't read yet, and I'm really interested because even though I haven't read him yet, I know that he's famous for his aesthetics and his writing style, and that really intrigues me. And Madame Bovary, which is the book that I've chosen to read, I've actually already bought it, so I'm hoping to get to it very soon. But that book is about a wife of a doctor who has extramarital affairs, and lives above her means in order to escape the monotony and banalities of life. I think that sounds very interesting, and this book was written in 1856, so it will be really interesting to read a book about these topics from the 1850s. So next we are moving from France to Ireland, and one of the authors that I hear being referenced to the most in popular culture and in culture in general, and that is Oscar Wilde. And I did some research on his work, and the novel that really caught my eye is The Picture of Dorian Gray. And that book was very controversial when it first came out in the 1890s. It was seen as very decadent, and I just think that sounds very interesting. So I actually already bought it and have it on my iPad, so I'm going to get to that very soon. So next we are going from Ireland to the US, and the next author is Ernest Hemingway. And I have read excerpts from Hemingway books, and I read a book about Hemingway, but I've never read a book by Hemingway. And I do think it's time to really change that. So when I was at the English bookshop in Antibes, I picked up this book, which aside from being very pretty, also sounds very interesting. And it's about the time he spent working as an expat journalist in Paris in the 1920s. And I just think that sounds super interesting, so I'm looking forward to reading this book. So next we are going to Russia, and the author is Leo Tolstoy. I haven't really read any of the big Russian classics, and except for like an extract from Crime and Punishment in school, I don't remember anything about that, and I probably didn't enjoy it since I was forced to read it. So now I want to give Russian classics a new chance, and I read the synopsises of the big Russian classics, and the one that spoke the most to me is Anna Karenina. And as I understand it, it's a sort of panorama of life in the Russian Empire in the 1870s. And I'm very interested in history, so I think that I will enjoy that book. And in the future, I would also like to read Crime and Punishment and War and Peace, which is also by Tolstoy, and Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. But that will be in the future, and maybe in the distant future, depending on how I like Anna Karenina. So the next author is much more contemporary, and it is Joan Didion, who's an American writer, and she passed away just last year, I believe. And she wrote fiction, non-fiction, and screenplays. And I had heard about her before, but in 2017 I watched the Netflix documentary about her, and I found it very interesting to hear about her life story, and I decided that I did want to read something by her, but I never got around to it. But I'm going to change that. I just can't really decide what to start with, her fiction or non-fiction. So I'm very open for suggestions if you have any. And I'm going to do some more research on BookTube and then decide what to start with. So a few years ago, I happened upon a podcast about H.P. Lovecraft. I had heard his name before, but I didn't really know anything about him or his work until I listened to the podcast. And for those of you who don't know, he was a pioneer when it came to mixing horror with fantasy, science fiction, and the weird. And that just sounded so unlike anything that I had read before. And the podcast intrigued me when it came to him and his work. But like I said before, I'm not a horror buff, so I never got around to reading one of his books. But now that I've decided to give horror books a chance, I really want to give one of his books a chance. So last but not least is George Orwell, and I do feel ashamed of not having read him. He's referenced, or his work is referenced all the time, and even though I do usually understand the meaning behind the references, I really want to read the books myself so that I can form my own opinion and really understand the meaning of those references more profoundly. And I think one of the main reasons I haven't read George Orwell yet is because I'm not really into dystopian novels. That really, it doesn't interest me that much. But I really want to read 1984, so that is the George Orwell book that I will start with, and I'm hoping to get to that very soon. So that's it for this video. I just want to say thank you so much for watching and see you next time.